Aaron Chambers here. Welcome to episode 32 of Enjoy the Journey with Aaron Chambers. I'm so glad that you found my podcast. If you like it, would you please subscribe, like it, give it a good review, give it 5 stars, give it a thumbs up, and let other people know about it. That would be so encouraging. I just want to share these conversations with as many people as possible, especially conversations like today. Today, we're talking to creative Don Smith. And when I say creative, I mean, that's actually who he is. He is a creative. He is the creative director at Hope Community Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's also the creative director for Exponential. Exponential is an amazing church planting conference, and it's an amazing conference, and they are really involved in church planting all over the world. And if you've never been to Exponential, I would encourage you to go to the website, exponential.org, and check out what is going on with Exponential, especially in 2021. Some really cool things happening. Actually, I'm going to be talking to the director of Exponential, Dave Ferguson, in just a couple of weeks. And I'm excited to share that conversation with you as well. So yeah, in this conversation, you're going to hear some really practical insights on the creative process, and you're going to hear ultimately about the power of storytelling, because as you listen to Don, you're going to see that he's a great storyteller. And what he will teach us is how to tell stories in our environments, in the moments we have in our organization, and in the awareness that we put out there for other people. So this is a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. My conversation with Don Smith. All right, guys. Hey, I'm so excited for you to be a part of this conversation. I have the highest respect for the person we're talking to today. I've known Don for like 15 years, and the respect I have for him is such that we actually brought him here to our church to do some creative consulting. And Don, because of your impact, dude, like if I could walk you around our building right now, and the feel of our location, your fingerprints are all over it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Man.
So this is Don Smith. Yeah. So Don Smith is our guest today. Don, glad to have you on my podcast, dude.
Hey man, I'm really excited to be here.
Dude, okay, so you're creative, man. Like we're gonna get into your backstory, but you are one of the most, you're creative, and you're also professionally creative. It's actually, you're the creative, you're the leader of the creative department at Hope Community Church.
Correct. Yep.
And then you're also the creative director for Exponential.
Yep.
And if you guys listen, y'all, if you don't know what Exponential is, get your act together. Exponential is a church planting conference, but it's also a movement.
Yes.
It is an incredible ministry. And we'll talk about that too. But so Don, dude, when did you start first realizing you had this creative gene? Like, what was it?
Okay, so I don't know that I actually even think that I'm creative. That's the hardest part about it, right? Like,
dude,
legitimately,
what's going on?
It's a really weird thing, man. So like I have, every once in a while I get these opportunities to go do something or to try something, or would you run something? And I'm like, absolutely. And then I step back and go, I don't really even understand like why I'm doing it, but okay, let's do it. That sounds great. Yeah, I don't know, man. Like my dad was a church planter in New York when I was growing up. He actually kind of went to a church that had been planted, and they kind of redid the whole thing. And so when you're in New York and you're doing the non-Jewish or Catholic thing, there's just not money there. Like that's not a thing that you have, right? So creativity had to happen every single day. And my dad, honestly, if I'm being honest, my dad always came up with these really big ideas of like, hey, well, what if we did it this way? Or what if we did it this way? And he didn't have staff because that's not a thing. So I ended up being the free staff, right? Because I want to eat at night and I live in his house. So you're going to go do this thing. So, I mean, man, I was running slide projector stuff when there wasn't like video camera, like video projectors. And it's all the slides, like we were really creative because we had a screen. I mean, it was
my goodness.
I mean,
you're old. Liberal too.
Yes. We were we were ruining all of the paradigms. It was crazy. We had a screen. We had like, not just the white slide projectors with the black letters, but my dad did work so we could have the black background with the white letters, y'all. It was like, what? But we grew beyond that, and he had some ideas. Hey, I really want to do this thing, and I need you to make it happen in perfect timing here, here, and here. And so I learned a lot there, man. I think that's where I started when I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old. In zero part of my life did I ever think I would do. I didn't even think I'd do ministry, let alone would I do creative ministries. Mm-hmm. I think the first time that I really started getting involved in it was when I was in college. I decided to do this ministry thing. I mean, long story short, I didn't want to do ministry because I wanted to make a bunch of money. I think every pastor's kid probably lives in that world a little bit like, oh, I need to make money. And then, yeah, that didn't happen. So I ended up doing ministry. But I remember thinking to myself, man, if I'm going to do it, I want to learn from incredibly like gifted people, churches that are killing it, people that are doing really well. And so I went to Kentucky Christian University,
Okay.
and I interned at Southeast Christian Church in Louisville in their college young adults.
Isn't that like a small church plan?
Yeah, they've done a few things. Yeah,
a few things.
So it's interesting. I actually came in, and for about 16 months I was there, and I was interning right when part of our job was to give tours to other churches that were coming in because they wanted to see the new building that we were building. And it was a 9,000 seat auditorium with escalators. And it was like, what in the world? Crazy. So like, but I worked with a guy named Jim Bergen mostly while I was there. And I learned so much. I mean, Bible college was incredible, gave me a great foundation on like Bible and kind of my doctrine, theological positions, and where I land on things. But you can only, I'll say this story. Aaron, I ramble, so go with it.
It's all good, dude.
I remember taking a class in college where the professor said that he was you got to be creative when you're working with young kids. And so, instead of the flannel graph being up here, I made a flannel graph apron, he said, and then put all of the characters on me down at the kids level, and then told them they could put. And I was like, I think you can go to jail for that, bro. I'm not, not sure you're allowed to do that.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I went to Southeast where I learned how to actually be creative and explain ministry, where it's probably not going to get me arrested and things like that. So that's probably where it started.
Oh my goodness. Well, guys, by the way, Jim Bergen is an incredible guy. Also leader of, I think they're running like 35,000 out here, at least pre-COVID out here in Colorado at Flatirons Church. So Don has had a chance to work with some amazingly good and godly and impactful people and churches. Southeast also is a great church. If you're not familiar with our tribe, it's one of the largest churches in the country. And dude, that flannel graph apron story.
It's going to mess with you the rest of the day.
Dude, that has a lot of shelf life.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so much I want to ask you about. Okay. So growing up in a pastor's home.
Yep.
I grew up in a pastor's home. What for you, and you have a sister, right?
I have 3 sisters. Yep.
3 sisters. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I should know that about you. Okay. So growing up in a pastor's home with your siblings, Don, like what was one of the highlight, low light?
Okay. Yeah. So, tons of highlights. My story probably could take us the whole hour. So there just of that, but tons of highlights. Honestly, I didn't realize how much it impacted me until I had done 18 years in 3 large churches, where I was where I was just the tech guy in one of them to the executive team at another one, and on and on. And it was like, I had taken a bit of a break. I was working with Exponential. So it wasn't a break from ministry, but it was like not the regular thing. And I was like, man, I work at Exponential. I probably should help a church get started. That seems like a good idea, since Exponential is this massive church planning organization. And so I helped plant a church, and I started bringing my kids to all of the setup and all of the different things. And one of the things that it reminded me of how much that impacted me as a kid. Now, when you were that kid growing up, you're like, oh, I got to go. I don't ever get a Sunday. I got to go and do, all the things. And there's some hard things that go with that, and you got to do that well, and you got to do that right. But as I was watching my children come with me to help plant this church in a movie theater, and every week carrying and stage stuff and setting up all the different signage and stuff, I thought, man, they're going to remember this. And I know that because it's what I remembered. I joked earlier about how my dad taught me a lot about creativity, but my dad, I think right now, my dad in a lot of ways can be my biggest fan. He says things all the time like, I have no idea how you come up with those things. And I always want to look back at him and go, I just learned it from you. I just watched you do it. And so, I would love that to be true of my children too, as they're kind of helping me through. I have 3 boys. And so we, one's younger, when we were doing the plan, at least, that was probably 5 years ago. he was only 3, so he didn't really help a lot at the time. But I have an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old right now that are very, very involved in the ministry that I do. And so I'd say that's the same thing with me when I was growing up. Now, the hard parts about that is, like, for a first little bit of it, we lived in a parsonage. That's just not a good thing at all, because people were like, oh, that's part of the church. We can just walk in whenever we want. And so, like, you'd be in bed and all of a sudden people are sitting in your kitchen, like, having a meeting. And you're like,
He's not joking.
I'm legitimately not
I grew up
joking.
in a parsonage too. He's not
Not,
joking.
that's not the best ever. Like, we don't love that, but yeah, man, my mom and my dad were a huge, like, tag team in doing ministry together. And my mom was a great leader, and probably the first example of an incredible leader that I got to watch. And in a time when female leadership, especially in the church, was probably frowned upon more than certainly more than it is now. I got to watch her kind of lead through that and manage through that. So yeah, I mean, that was it. I think some other big things. My mom passed away when I was 15, and as horrible of an experience as that is, she got sick when I was 9, really sick when I was 13, and died when I was 15. And so, as horrible as that part is, to watch the amount of people that come through at a funeral, or, I mean, her tombstone says she made a difference. That's her line. That huge impact to me, of watching. There was like 1,000 people that came to her funeral. Like, it was crazy in a small church that ran at best in the 350s. There were just people for forever that would talk about that impact. And so, yeah, those are the positives. I don't mean to, like,
no, it's
really
great.
weigh the conversation down now.
Oh my goodness. I love what you said about your mom, and the fact that she, it says she made a difference. I'm like, I wrote that down. Like, that's what a beautiful tribute.
Yeah. And what a,
and your dad,
what
is your dad still?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Is your dad still alive and in ministry, or?
My dad is retired and lives in Virginia. It's called the Delmar Peninsula. So it's like this, this part that is, I guess, basically part of 2 states. And yeah, even that's a really weird story. So my mom died when I was 15, and a really close family friend, the couple were, I mean, she was there when I was born. The couple, they were like the 4 of them, my dad, my mom, and Ruth and Johnny, were very close friends. He was on the elder board of the church, all the things, right? And about 5 years after my mom passed away, at my sister's wedding, Ruthie's husband, Johnny, had passed away about 2 years earlier. And my dad and Ruthie danced. And 2 months later, they got married. And so they've been married for 24 years now.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah, I jokingly tell people all the time, and my dad was the best man at my dad's wedding. So I jokingly tell people that my dad married my Aunt Ruthie. But at the time I lived in Kentucky, so it wasn't a big deal, but yeah, it was like, it was one of those situations where you got a close family friend and you call them aunt and uncle. So it was kind of interesting, but yeah, it's kind of cool because my kids have a grandma still, so.
Yeah. So you and your wife have, you said 3 boys.
3 boys. Yep.
And hearing you talk about your parents, what's something right now that you and Jenna are just really savoring at this stage in parenting?
Man, okay. So my oldest is a senior, so that's what we're savoring. I am going to be an unbelievable mess when Braden goes to college. My wife's probably going to be fine. I'm not going to be fine. It's going to mess with me a little bit. Braden is he's a senior and he's got 1 semester left, and he's right now, he texted me today, Dad, I got accepted to, and it was like, that's great. I'm really proud of him, really excited about him. I mean, he's a senior in high school / a second semester sophomore in college. He'll graduate high school with an associate's degree in college, completely wrapped up and finished. I mean, he's doing all the things, but he's going to leave, and it's never going to be the same again. And that's probably the thing I'm savoring a lot. And I think COVID helped that a little bit. With all the things that I do, I travel a ton, but I haven't traveled since Exponential last year, which was just shy of a year ago. So I have been around a lot, and it's been great, and I'm really thankful for it.
Don, you and Jenna do family really well. I've been around you guys at conferences, week-long conferences, and I've seen you guys interact with your kids and stuff. Before we move away from the family kind of stuff, you're humble, but like, just like, what have you and your wife done right?
Okay. This is probably debatable for some people, but I'll stick by it. Early in ministry, like I said, I kind of came into this gig kicking and screaming. I didn't really want to do this thing. But early in ministry, we decided, okay, we're going to be all in. And so we were at a church, and some rough stuff happened on leadership that I was unfortunately the one who got a chance to discover the rough stuff. We'll just leave it at that. And it was very difficult for me. And in a lot of places, I had people that were encouraged, hey, you don't share that kind of stuff with your spouse. I did, because I needed somebody to process with. I needed somebody to think through this. I needed her to understand why am I different? I had just kind of caught the stuff you don't want to talk about in church. I had bumped into that, and I was 22. And I remember the person that we were dealing with saying, you don't tell your wife that stuff. And I was like, I do. I think the thing we've done right is that we talk about everything. There's just nothing that she doesn't know that's going on in my life, yeah, I mean, like, there's times now I've got a pretty large staff that are on my team, probably about 40 or so people that are in some way answering to my world. And I'll call her sometime and talk about it before I talk to them, because I'm an external processor and I need to process it to her first so that I can then give it to them. So, I mean, Jenna really is my first stop on any major decision. Matter of fact, here's a story. I hate these because this is going to sound a little bit weird. I had been offered a couple different churches, church positions, and we had left the church.
Talented, Don.
Sorry, that's what
happens when you're sane, when you're talented, when you've done the hard work. Like, work pursues you, okay? So don't you dare act like that's weird.
Yeah,
right? We hired you to come to our church and help us remodel. So, okay, there you go.
Thank you. I appreciate, and I was honored. It was an incredibly cool story. I actually still show your renders to people all the time.
Don walked into our building, and you were there literally 18 seconds, and you look up and you're like, Chambers, chandelier, really?
Dude, it's not just a chandelier, bro. That was a serious chandelier.
The chandelier's gone.
Impressive work. Okay, so I had been offered a bunch of positions, and we had been hurt. The rough situation we'd gone through with the church before, that'll break you a little bit. And so when we got offered the positions, I could just tell it was a no. But I didn't say anything about it. It wasn't time yet. Then a really good friend of mine who had started a company that grew and grew and grew, and it had a conference attached to it, asked me to come be the CEO of the company. We'd have to move to Nashville, and it would have been like a big thing. It was a pretty serious paycheck attached to it and a large percentage of ownership in the company. And so in my mind, any leader you're looking at, you're going, oh, okay, CEO. I mean, that's the title that should be me, right? I got to do that. I don't know. How do you not do that? They flew out, like, they did the whole thing where they flew to our house, and actually were doing an event that they wanted me to come to where I met Dabo Sweeney, and it was strange. It was a cool thing. I'm having a blast, right? And we get done talking with them, and I ask her, what do you think? She's like, let's talk about it tomorrow. And so the next day comes around. She goes, I want to ask you a question. She said, what happens if you're really good friends with the guy who is the current CEO, wants to move on to founder and do some other things like that? You're really good friends with him, right? Yeah. What happens if you guys disagree on a decision? I said, well, I mean, I'm the CEO of the company. I think we got to go. We got to argue that. She said, okay, here's the question I want to know. Are you willing to sacrifice your friendship for that? Because there's a chance that would probably happen. And I was like, I don't want to hear this from you. I want you to say, yes, you're awesome. You should totally do this. You're the best ever. And all the things that men want to hear from their spouses. And I was like, okay. And I struggled with it. I wrestled with it a little bit. And then the next day I had a call with that person, and he said, hey, I want to ask you a question. What happens if you and I disagree on something? And he asks me the same question. And I was like, well, let's talk through it a little bit. Long story short, about a week later, I came into the house and I said, hey, I turned the company down. And she looked at me and she said, you did? And I said, yeah, I did. And she said, why? I said, do you remember that conversation we had like a week ago? Like, kind of bring her back to it. And she said, you listened to that. I didn't realize that you would I thought you wanted it so bad. I didn't think you'd actually listen to that. And I said, Jenna, every decision I've made in my life has been connected to your counsel, because you're incredibly wise when it comes to stuff like that. And it was like a switch happened in our marriage, that she realized it wasn't just theoretical anymore. She realized, man, this matters to him. And so about 2 months later, I got offered another spot, and I'm sitting in that spot right now. And I didn't think I should do it. I was like, there's no way I should come. I mean, I was hired, I own a company, and I was hired to consult with this church. And they asked me to stay. And I was like, she doesn't like to, we turned on 5 churches. She does, it's 5 wow churches, by the way, like not like the ones you want to go to. Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's no way she doesn't want to do this. But when they're my client, it's different. Like, it's autonomous, but now it's like, would you come and stay? And she said, I think you should lean into this one. And so we did, and we stayed, and it was one of the best decisions we've ever made. So yeah, man, the long story short, because I tell stories, it's I listen to my wife a lot. She's smarter than me. So I trust that.
You tell stories. So side note, one of my mentors, Alan Algram, said the voice of God so often sounds like his wife's. And you mentioned your mom being a strong woman, Don, and your wife is a strong woman. And for anybody who's listening and who may be young and thinking about getting married or newly married, if you replay what Don just shared and the interaction he had with his wife, that's a beautiful picture of a godly, healthy dynamic in a marriage. And that's what it looks like. You have hard conversations, and like just like you said, Don, so often the voice of God sounds like my wife.
Yep, that's really true.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really important you shared that. So let me talk to you about yeah, that was deep. I want to talk to you about a couple things, the creative process, but so you work for Exponential.
I do. Yep.
And could you describe a little bit, because I've been to Exponential. It's a fantastic conference, first class conference. And yeah, how did you get connected with Exponential, and describe a little bit about what you do as the creative director?
Okay, podcast people, be ready. Like I said earlier, I tell stories, so I can't really just go, well, I did a thing. It's a crazy, God does this. I don't know how else to describe it than this. Okay, God does this. So I was at a church that I thought, this is probably the one I'm gonna finish at. And again, my wife, about 3 years in, some doctrine shifts were being made that were kind of hard to deal with. But when you're in the mess, when you're in the deal, you don't see it as well. These are all your closest friends. You're kind of it's a smaller church that's growing, and you're working through this. And so as you're starting to see things play out, Jenna saw it a mile back. I didn't. And she was like, hey, I need you to be careful. Now, I didn't want to hear that either, right? I didn't want to, oh, okay. And she was like, this isn't going well. I feel like doctrine's starting to shift. About a year and a half later on, I started to see, yeah, doctrine's really starting to shift. And if I was to summarize it, I'd say they read Love Wins and went, sure, I like all of that. And I was like, well, I like it. I just can't get by it, right? Like there's unfortunate elements to that. Yeah. And so it was time to go, and we knew it was time to go. And I had some hard conversations, and the lead pastor agreed, because I'd said, this has got to change, or I got to go. And he was like, well, it's not going to change. And I was like, okay, well, I got to go. And now I've got to figure out what's next. Yep. I had a very specific evening during that time where I was praying. My wife and her sister, and then our brother-in-law, and her husband, the 4 of us were at my house, and they live in Ohio, but they were visiting. And I came back and I was like, guys, something's got to change. I've got to go. We need to pray. And so we sat down at a specific prayer time that was like, I'll never forget. God, just open a door. I didn't put a resume out. I've actually candidly really never put a resume out except for the first time. But I got to go. So the next morning, I got a phone call from LG, which is, like they make refrigerators and stuff.
Yes. I thought it was like an abbreviation for like Larry Gordon.
Yeah, right. I was like, no, I was like, oh, the TV people. Okay, that's cool. When I went into this church, it was a small church, and it was about a church plant. And I had started a marketing firm because I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. And And basically they'd seen some of the work that we had ended up doing some work for AT&T we did all of their marketing work for the state of North Carolina. So they had seen some of it. And the next morning after this prayer of I gotta go, I get a phone call from the senior vice president of marketing from LG and says, hey, we've seen your work. Could we use you in our pool? Yeah, yes, you can. And I thought, okay, I guess I'm going to the private, I don't know, what do you call this, private sector, whatever the non-church world is.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my world. And I was like, okay, I guess that's what God's going to do. That's fine. And about 3 hours later, I had lunch with somebody and I got this text, and it was from a guy named Dave Ferguson. And he said, hey, three different people, we've been looking for a creative director for Exponential. 3 different people have asked us who we should hire. And they've all said you, that you're the person. So we're reaching out just to see if you'd be interested. And it was funny because I called immediately and said, sure, I'd love to. What's Exponential? I didn't even know what it was. And I was like, oh, it's the largest gathering of church planners on the planet. Okay, well, that's cool. There's probably 100 or so of those. No, there's 6,000 that come to Exponential Orlando every year. The first year I was there, there was 49,000 people watching it online from 90 different countries.
Yes.
I was like, oh, okay. I got to do you this story. Okay. Aaron and I know each other mainly because I used to do a bunch of youth conferences. This one in particular called Summer in the Sun at Kentucky Christian University that I was the program director for 15 years. And so I was thinking that in my mind when they called me and they said, hey, why don't we fly you out to, kind of you can help us with our planning for the next season. And we would love to see you in that position. And we'll just go ahead and see it. We'll make that like your audition. It's like, okay, where is it? It's in LA. Yeah, I'm going to LA. That sounds awesome. I'll fly to LA. Again, I'm thinking youth campish mindset because I've never been to Exponential before.
Yeah.
I land. I didn't even look at the address. I rent a car. I start driving, and I'm gonna get this wrong, but it was like 8925 Purpose Drive was where it was, and I was like, okay. So I start driving towards Orange County. It's in Rick Warren's office. The meeting is okay. And I was like, so Rick at this one place, he's got an office behind stage, but he's got this other place. And it's like, he's got this office and he's got this boardroom like right connected to it. And we're meeting in there all day. And like a bunch of his staff is in it. Like the campus pastor from Liberty University flew out for it. There's a bunch of other pastors. It was this was intimidating, right? Yeah. And I was like, all right, I guess we're doing this. And we ran the whole day and I ended up getting the job. So that was kind of cool. So I was going to try to do that and church at the same time. And then when it was time to leave, it was enough for me to be able to sit back and just do Exponential and let God do some healing work on it. So we gather, not gathering in 2021 because of obvious reasons, but in 2022. And Todd Wilson, who's one of the smarter people on the planet, Dave Ferguson. Yes. So Todd, Dave, a couple of people, myself, we work on what's a theme, what do we really feel like God's trying to move the needle on. There are conferences, I call them VBS for adults. There's conferences out there that are like just kind of feel good conferences. Exponential is not that. Exponential really has a vision and an idea of moving the needle of success in church from this idea of addition, of how many people do you have coming to my thing on the weekend, which is kind of, if we're being honest, a lot of pastors are going to work through that and be like, wow, we're growing and I've now a mega church and all that. Great. That's awesome. But the idea of multiplication, how can what would happen if we were churches that planted churches? What would happen? How would saturate the globe with the gospel if we had churches that were perennially thinking about how do I start another church? And so we do things to shift that mindset, really, really trying to do that. And it's a blast. So you said, so what do I do? What I basically call is I write the conference. Everything that happens in the main space is on my shoulders. So we'll come up with an idea. We'll have a point paper. We break it down into, if we want to get from here to here, if we want to get from A to C or A to F, then we've got to stop by B, C, D, E on the way. We've got to ask, and so each session would be that. But if we're going to do that, then we actually have to go through, well, what steps in each session do we need to talk about so that so-and-so, and then, okay, so now we've got a step between what's the topic, but then what's the subtopic? Okay, who'd be great to present on that topic? So then we start going after speakers. And so, I've had the honor to work with just about every speaker I can think of in that context, which is really, really cool. But then in reality, when you start talking about these things that you want to do and you want to move the needle in church success, well, that sounds large and big and hard, and it is. So then alongside that, I'll fly around the country and talk to people that are doing the thing we're talking about, and then bring a video team out with us, and then they'll edit the story down. So I want people in the crowd to go, man, I don't think I can do that. That sounds too big. And then they're confronted with a story of somebody who's not really any different than them that did that exact thing. And then they're going, oh, okay. So for instance, I did one, probably 4 years ago, we were trying to change it was called Becoming Five was the topic of the year. And it was this idea of a level 5 multiplying church. And if you go to exponential.org, you can hear all about level 5 churches. But the idea, I'm thinking to myself, if I'm a pastor or a planter or a possible planter who's coming to a conference like this, and I'm thinking, man, you're asking me to plant churches that plant churches or to plant multiple churches. I'm just worried about planting the one. What do I do with that? And so I know people are thinking that. And so I want to confront that where the people are. And so the first thing I did was I created this role called the voice of the opposition, where we finish this talk and lights go down the room and somebody stands up in the audience and basically just blasts the idea of what the person just said. Like, are you kidding me? There's, all the things like that. There's no way I can pull this off. You think I could do all these things like that? So now the problem is everybody in the crowd's going, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's right. And if you don't have that person show up there, then you've got everybody in the room going, yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to move on, right? Like they just don't think about it because it just doesn't sound like, but now I've got you because you agree with that person. After that, we'll do a story of a person who did that. So like JD Greer at Summit Church, he and I did an interview with JD where he talked about the idea of this. But then what I did was the next session, I did a story with one of the guys who planted out of the summit and what that was like. And the next session, I did a story of the guy who planted out of that guy's church, so that it was like generational plant. And so now you're going, man, I can't achieve that too. Oh, well, they're doing it. I guess it can be done, right? So now at least it doesn't seem impossible. Sometimes I get a chance to do those. Sometimes I get to work with people like Tim Tebow or Tony Dungy, or just different coaches and different people like that I've, along the line that have a great story. It's pretty fun to do those too. But
yeah, so we do a thing. We just actually did in our staff meeting this week where every once in a while, like, okay, 2 people you'd like to have coffee with, dead or alive, Jesus is off the table.
right.
You actually get to have coffee with some of the people on the list.
I do actually. Yeah,
so what, like, do you have you're a storyteller, any cool stories or just generally speaking, like, because that's one of the things that, I'm awfully shallow sometimes. And one of the things I think would be, what it would be like to be in a green room with Tim Tebow? What would I ask him? Yeah, can you feed that lesser nature in the audience that really wants to know what's it like to meet some of these famous Christian leaders?
Sure, I'll do you. I'll give you 2. Sure, let's try it. Let's give it a shot.
And if you don't want to use their names to protect their identity, that's fine too.
No, like I was in a room with Tim Tebow, not like Tim, like my boy Tim.
Yeah, Timmy.
Met like twice,
Timothy.
That's it. I was in a room with him when he was doing the motivational video Zoom to all the people for Night to Shine, and I was sitting in the back. And so that was really cool to watch him do that. Afterwards, we just set up an interview and I got to ask him a bunch of questions, and then we hung out for a little bit afterwards, and that was really, really good. Those are great. Tony Dungy, one of the most just genuinely awesome people. Yeah, it was incredible. Like just got a chance to talk with him and hang out with him, and that was great. I'll give you that moment. So here's the deal. So one of the things that Exponential does is that we don't give anybody a lot of time to speak. It doesn't really matter who you are, right?
Oh, yeah.
We talk an awful lot about the goal for us is that a lot of conferences are like triangles, right? So like you've got a person up on the stage and they're kind of disseminating information out to the crowd. So it's kind of like a triangle, right?
I'm writing this down.
Yeah, the goal for us is that Exponential feels like a circle. Well, that means it's a continual conversation that's happening. So by and large, if you're going to come speak at Exponential, we're going to also ask you to do a breakout. We're going to ask you to hang out. So it's not unheard of when Rick speaks and Rick Warren will come speak that you'll then look out and be like, hey, where's Rick? He's out on a picnic bench with 8 guys just talking about ministry. And you're like, wait, what? Rick Warren? Yeah, he does all the time. Loves it. And so here I am, the first year that I'm going to be there. And it was Andy Stanley, Rick Warren, and Bill Hybels. This was like 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. And so they're all going to speak. And so I walk into a room. I have no idea. This is my first one. I have no idea what to expect. Right.
Yeah.
And I walk into a room and I don't get starstruck. Okay. Like I've been around a lot of people. I don't really get starstruck.
Yeah.
Andy Stanley did something interesting. I was like, wow, that's like the Protestant Pope. That's like Andy Stanley. Like that's okay. A little bit starstruck. I walk into the room, to the green room where everybody is. And he's sitting with his chair against the wall, kind of leaned back, just looking at something, no big deal. And I'm like, I guess I probably should go introduce myself to him. I don't know. Now, you got to know, before we have this, we have multiple conversations with these people about what we're going to talk about, how much time they have, all the things, right? I walk up and I'm like, hey, Andy, my name's Don. And he's like, oh, hey, Don. Oh, Don. Oh, hey, how much time do I have? And I was like, well, you've got like 25 minutes. And he was like, 25 minutes. I don't really know if I can get it done in 20. You probably should just give my time to these two guys, and like I'll just go home and they can get more done with the time. And I was like, well, no, don't. I'll be right back. And so I leave the room. I go up to, I can't remember if it was Rick or one of his people, and I'm like, I'm cutting Rick from. He was just doing like the small part in the session. I'm like, I'm cutting that. I'm cut it out. Got 5 minutes out of that. Coming back, I go back to Andy, and I'm like, Andy, I got you 30 minutes. Is that okay? And he's like, oh, dude, I was totally kidding. I would have done it for 25. I was just giving you a hard. He goes, I'm going to keep the 30, but I was just totally kidding. I like almost wet my pants. I was like, I almost had Andy Stanley leave the Exponential conference. So he got there early enough though. And this was cracked me up because he's like one of the just more real and authentic people. Like he's just funny. We're sitting in the back room, and in between every main session, there's a breakout that happens on stage. There's probably only 100 people in this 5,000 seat auditorium, but we're filming it because then we're going to use it the rest of the year. So, so Jeannie Stevens is speaking on stage, and she's doing this teaching thing. And before she's teaching on stage, she's getting ready. She goes off to, I don't know, get ready somewhere. And she left her notes at the table. Well, she had once worked at North Point, so she and Andy knew each other well. Andy gets up, not saying a word to anybody, walks around, sits at her deal, and starts writing in the margins of her talk, like, we miss you, Jeannie. Like, that's not true. Like, we're cracking up. Like, we can't, like, and then he closes it, puts the pen back, goes, sits back where he is. And then, so I'm walking out. I'm like, I've got to watch this talk now. And she starts presenting, and she's like, and so, and it's like, you're just watching her catch herself. And I'm like, I know why, because Andy's just writing random things in her notes. And I was like, okay, I love that. So there you go. There's a story that was kind of funny to me. I almost got Andy Stanley to leave Exponential. That was not my best.
That would have been your claim to fame.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hey, so if the audience hasn't picked up yet, you're a storyteller. You tell stories, and it struck me that I didn't connect all the dots, but when you came to give us, you were consulting with our church about how to, I called you because we wanted to remodel our building, but immediately you started talking in terms of story. You're like, Aaron, your building's telling a story. And so we spent a lot of time figuring out what that story is, what it needs to be, what it should be.
Yeah.
So then if people have been listening carefully to you, you said several times, I tell stories. You talked about with Exponential, writing the conference, literally writing the conference.
Yep.
So, okay, I want to ask you to do a couple things in our remaining time together. I want you to talk through the creative process in terms of storytelling, if you don't mind. Yep. And I want you to keep in mind the men and women who are serving in small organizations, small churches, Absolutely. Who may not feel creative, who may feel like you're speaking a foreign language. Like, what can you do? I want you to explain your creative process in context of story, but I also want you to speak to those who may be listening who really want to be creative, want help with creativity. Sure. Give them some tools on things they can do to be more creative. Is that okay? Yeah. Is that cool?
No, absolutely. Sure. I'll do my best. I'll say this about that. Growing up in New York, what I learned about people in New York is that everybody is skeptical in New York. If you walk around when I was growing up and you said, hey, I'm good at X or I'm good at Y, nobody would go, oh, he must be good at that thing. They'd be like, right, we'll see. There was very much a we'll see mentality, right? And I think in reality, what that did for me, if I'm saying like what made me kind of be able to use for later in life, I was prepped for something early that I think the world is prepped for now. Okay, so marketing when we were younger, right? If somebody had a shiny brochure, or somebody had a business card and they were like, hey, look at my thing. This is my company. This is my business, whatever I do. You'd be like, wow, that's impressive. That thing looks great. It must be awesome. Now there's a bit of skepticism in us where you hand somebody a thing and they go, what are they up to? Right? Like it's not the same thing. And so what happened was I started realizing that if that's true in the world, it's certainly true in the church, right? I mean, like that's just true. And so when someone says, hey, you got to come to my church, it's just different. People are like, we'll see, right? There's always that kind of arms folded, we'll see mentality. And so I started to realize that the times that people don't do that, they kind of unfold their arms is when your church tells a story. So I created a company called Storylabs, storylabs.info, if you want to check it out. And we did what we did with Aaron's church. We do it all over the country. Where we started to realize that there's 3 different ways that you tell stories now. And those ways that you tell stories tell your story of a church. And so one of the things that Exponential kind of convicted me of was, I've got to be honest, I got there and I was like, man, that's like 6,000 church planters. And I'd lived in Indianapolis for a while where you don't have to look far to see a church. And I had to be confronted with this idea of like, do we really need more churches, or do we just need to fix the ones we have? Like I kind of gotten that stuck. And the answer was, yes, we need more churches and we need to fix the ones we have. But one of the things I realized through the process was, here's what we don't need. We don't need a lot of churches that are going around reading the next book saying, well, it's working for them, I'll just be a clone of that and it'll work for me. Because what we started to think through is God put something very unique inside of you and the leadership of your church that was going to be in like kind of in a 1 Corinthians 12 mindset, that's going to express Jesus as part of a body that will connect to people that a church down the street won't, if you're authentically that. But if you read the book and be the church down the street, we already have that. We don't need that. We need you. There's something in you. You're going to tell the story of God in a way that is going to connect to people other places won't do. And so we've got to figure out how to get churches to figure out what that story is, because that's the problem. We've all kind of gotten into this mindset where we're going to read 5 or 6 leadership books and say, oh, we'll just be those things. And I'm not saying you shouldn't read leadership books. I read them all the time, but you glean what you can from them while not violating the unique thing that God's doing in you. Right. Yep. And so we find ourselves helping churches. We take them through this thing called a Story Lab, and we help them figure out what's unique about us in the kingdom. What is the thing that God is doing in us and through us that we want to give to the world? And then we say, how do we then tell that story? We do it through 3 ways. We talk about creating environments. Your building tells a story. When somebody walks into your space, they will learn more about who you are by what the building looks like, whether you like it or not. They will learn more about that than they will by somebody's words. Somebody on stage gets up and says, hey, here's what we are. We are a church that X. That's great. But if they walked into an environment that tells a different story, they just don't trust you from that point forward, right? And so we want to create an environment that tells your story, and I'll explain that a little bit in a minute. We talk about creating moments then, okay? And this happens in different elements at all the times. The stories that you tell through a testimony video, the songs and the different moments you have with worship leaders and different people that come on stage, they all tell a story by creating moments that people go, because the thing is that most times, I apologize for this, sir, because I know you preach a lot, Aaron. But if I was to ask somebody 6 weeks ago, what did Aaron say on stage?
They won't have any idea.
They won't remember at all. But if there was a story that you told, if there was a moment created in the service, if there was, some churches use cover songs of like things, like we do that a lot, they'll remember those pieces. You know, like, oh my goodness, I remember when we did that. Yeah. And what that does is it ties back, if you're thinking that way, it ties back to what Aaron spoke about. And therefore I remember what Aaron spoke about. Right. And so we create moments that then help to do that. And then lastly, we create awareness. And that's really basically just your standard marketing. Okay. Web presence, social media presence that tells a story about who you are and what, and what's unique about you in the kingdom. And that's there to make them aware of who you say you are. The other 2 places are there to actually prove your point, right? The goal in my mind, just like the magic moment, is you've got this couple who, like, first of all, I don't think there's a lot of people that have never heard of church, never heard of God in America that just aren't going because they've never heard, okay? We talk about people that have stopped listening, and we're trying to get them to start listening again. At some point in time, they went and it became in their mind irrelevant, or life got busy and they were like, yeah, I'm good, right? And they moved on. And our goal is to kind of get them to lean back in and say, hey, this is for you, and we need this, but we got to prove that point, right? So my beautiful, like what I see in my head is this young couple that had a kid, had their child, and they're like, I think it's time for us to get back in church, and it seems like that's a time when someone will come back into church, and usually one of the two in the couple want to go more than the other one. And so they walk in and his arms are folded and he's got all these ideas and he's waiting for you to prove him right about all the things that he thinks are wrong about church that he doesn't want to be a part of. He's waiting for all that to happen. And you have moments along the way that you can create, and you've got an environment that tells a story to kind of break down those presuppositional walls that he has built inside of him, so that when Aaron gets up to speak and teach a message, maybe the walls are half down, right? And it's not all on you to have to do all that work to try to create all the space for that person to do that. And so maybe those walls are down, and then you get to bring something in. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, you talk about, or sometime later, you talk about vision and mission of who we are at our church, who Journey is, whatever church you're at. And this is what keeps us up at night. This is what feeds us. This is what we want to be. And that person goes, I absolutely believe that because I've experienced it through the moments you've created. I can see it all over your walls. I know what story this is. I want that. Yes, that is exactly who you are. And for some reason, when that happens, if they've experienced it first, there's this trust bond that's created between you and them because they trust that when you experience it first, I don't have to wonder if I trust Aaron. I've already felt it. And then you say it and I'm like, yeah, he's not lying. I've been there. I just lose my mind when that happens. And so when I'm at Exponential and I'm creating, that's all about creating moments, right? What are the ways that we can create moments that make you feel like I can do this, or that make you feel like I want to do this, that make you feel like that? You said, what are some key things that I think through? Well, I think the number one word I use more than anything else is empathy. I don't believe you can be effectively creative if you can't see through somebody else's eyes. Okay. To do something really creative and fun for the sake of doing something really creative and fun, it doesn't do anything. I mean, it's great and I love it. And you may trip over some people that connect to it, but I'm much more strategic about it. I know the person I'm trying to speak to, and I want to create an opportunity for them to go, whoa, no way they would do that in church. That they would go, man, I really do feel that way, whatever that way is that you're talking about that way. Yeah, that is a felt need that I'm trying to work through. But I can't just throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks. I have to I'm thinking about who am I aiming at? And that's an issue for churches because a lot of churches just think, well, we aim at everybody. Well, if you believe in kingdom and you believe that you're not the only church out there for people, then the pressure's off, man. You don't have to worry about everybody. You can be okay with the church down the street having singles ministry that's awesome, then you don't, because send them that way, because that's a kingdom win. You now have more seats for the people that you're uniquely poised to reach, right? Yeah. So that's a huge win. So be thinking about the things that God did inside of you and says, man, these are the people I'm called to. Doesn't mean other people can't come, but there are some people that you're like, I feel like we are uniquely gifted to reach these people in our climate, our community, the different people we're around. So you got empathy is huge. What are they thinking about? What are they feeling? What's going on right now? If you're, goodness, 2020 was a year for that, right? Like COVID and fear and, I don't want to come back to church. And if I do want to come back to church, I'm afraid of my kids. And I mean, you got to get in their minds, and so I try to balance. I don't want to be too on social media because my soul matters, but I do want to be on there enough to see what's going on. Right. And I spend a lot of time in that space. And then I start writing for those people. And I very often say, okay, so what's going to make them feel like it's going to be okay? But I'm not going to start with just what makes them feel like it's going to be okay. I'm going to start with letting them know that their feelings are rational and real. And I can't do that without empathy. So I've got to know what they're feeling. I can't just guess, So is that helpful?
That's so helpful. Yeah. And Don, you have such a heart for those on the margins. You think of the skeptics.
Yeah.
You said, I wrote down, I'm taking notes, by the way. I hope people take notes of this conversation. It's so rich. You mentioned that thing at the session at Exponential where you had somebody stand up and say, but what about this? You also mentioned, as in another context, trying to communicate to those who aren't listening. And then you talked about looking through their eyes. What was it on your journey that wired you to think about the skeptic, to think about the people on the fringes?
Yeah, I think it goes back to growing up in New York, man. Like I was the person on the fringes in a weird way. because all of my friends were Jewish or Catholic. And
Okay.
so I didn't naturally fit into that, right? Like we were the weird church that wasn't Jewish or Catholic, you know? And so all of my friends, when I think about the people I'm reaching out to, it's the people I grew up with. I think, no, I don't, I mean, I live in North Carolina, not New York, although there's quite a few New Yorkers that have moved to North Carolina. So I don't program for the New Yorkers here, but I always think about, man, what would it be like if so-and-so, what would it be like if Pat was connecting like that? One of my good friends from back when I was a kid, I named Pat, and we still talk now. And I think to myself all the time, like, what would happen if he met Jesus? You know, and well, again, New Yorkers don't trust anybody. So I have to consistently over time, trust equals consistency over time, right? So I have to consistently over time show him a story. And part of it is what God's doing in me. Part of it is what God's doing in the people in my church. He asks, right? So I answer. But I'm consistently thinking about those people all the time. And then, you know, when you start doing it in church, they come. You know, I've always often said, I was talking to somebody just the other day about this, that I really feel like the best form of discipleship or the best methodology for discipleship is outreach. Because if you go out there and you win somebody to Jesus, all you want to do is know more about him so that you can win somebody else to Jesus. And so what we do, a lot of times churches sit there and they think, well, what's the best thing? And we're in, you know, these different methods and, you know, we study this, we study that. And I'm like, there's just people out there that need us. And the moment that you connect with one of them, you just want to go connect with another one. And when you do that, you start to realize, hey, that worked, but that didn't work. Or, hey, I thought that was relevant, but it wasn't. You know, listen, we don't win all the time. I try stuff and I'm like, no, let's not do that twice. You know, that happens quite a bit. But yeah, man, that's just like, that's what fuels me is I would love to see some of the people that I grew up with be really connected to God, you know? And so that's it.
And that's why when you were out here with us, you introduced 4 words into our lexicon that we use all the time. You asked us, Aaron, does your building communicate to people who visit that you are expecting them? Because they need to hear this phrase, we were expecting you. Don, that has stuck with us, dude. And that is, we think about it all the time. In this situation, in this program, in this setting, whatever, in this message, am I communicating to people that we've been trying to reach, whether it's online, virtually, or in person? We were expecting you. And that's now I see even deeper why that phrase is important for us to ask. That question is important. That phrase is important for us to reckon with, and it should lead us to ask questions as we create, as you said, as we create environment, moments, and awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I was telling somebody on our staff here the other day that we don't think of outsiders as people that are wondering about God. Okay, that's not who I'm programming for. I'm programming for people who are oppositional to Christ, right? That are living in a spot where they're going, this isn't going to work. But my life is in such a bad spot right now. I'll give anything one more shot, right? I don't expect a person to come in with like wide eyes and be like, ooh, tell me more. That's not the outsider that I have in mind. Those people exist. I just don't think a lot of them exist. I think a lot more people are just hurt by life and want to blame God for it, and for whatever reason that is. And so we already have an uphill battle. I got to think about them. I don't bring them in with their arms like, they're not curious about this thing. They're actually somewhat against it and are looking for you to confirm all their suspicions. With that in mind, when an outsider walks in your door and you're thinking like that, it's a different approach to programming how you do what you do on the weekend. It's a different approach to thinking through what programs you even do, right? One of the things that I talked us through here is, hey, you can only do so many programs well, even if you're a really large church, you know, and not only that, but if you offer everything, you basically offer nothing, right? If you market to everything, you market to nothing. So by saying, man, we have 45 programs, nobody can remember that, right? So what are the number of programs that you can do in your church and different things that you can offer that you feel like are really going to uniquely touch your people, the people that you feel like God's gifted you to reach? And then do you really trust that there's a church down the street that can handle the rest? And it's totally cool. And what if we partnered up? We could do so much more together than we do apart, right? Like that's a win. And it'll shift you. This is hard for leaders because the truth of the matter is it may shrink your church a little bit before it grows your church a little bit. And nobody wants that to happen. But the kingdom wins in the end. So it's a good thing.
Yep. Okay, practical barriers that leaders can remove to release the creative process. Just a couple. I know we're kind of running out of time, but as you were talking, I thought,
I could do
man,
this forever. So
I know. Well, just I'm listening
covered
because
me.
it's so rich, but I keep thinking about the young men and women in leadership, whether it's church or a business, and they want to be more creative, or they are creative, but they feel like they're always come up against a wall. Like,
Okay.
what are some barriers that need to be removed to free up the creative process?
Okay, I'll give you a couple things that are just true of me. Okay, 2 churches ago, I managed a creative budget, or I managed a whole department. So it wasn't just the creative budget, but it was a big department. And our budget for the year was just over $1 million. Okay, I could buy anything I want. That was basically it. If we want to do it, I can make this thing happen. It might have been the least creative I ever was. Okay. I moved from that to help plant a church. Not really plant a church. It was a church that was started and lead pastor left, but it didn't have a lot. Okay. My budget for the year remember, it was $1 million, was $17,000. Okay. We went from $1 million at one place to $17,000. I was never more creative in my entire life. Cause I had to be, right? Like, okay. It wasn't a matter of buying the thing. It was a matter of, okay, how do I find a way to creatively communicate the story to these people that I want to communicate? And I can't go out and buy a car and put it on stage. I never did that, but yeah. I can't go buy a big thing and put it on stage, or, I got to make something happen. So it'd be really strategic on the money that we did spend and stretch it to go a long, long way. And then you needed some teams, you needed volunteers that can help execute the idea that you have. And you had to think, okay, what do we need to do to make this thing happen? Because of that, now I work at a church. That's the largest church that I've ever worked at. We run around 12,000 people or so in a weekend. And I have a pretty substantial budget, but I still think like the other space, right? I'm a Dave Ramsey guy, all this stuff like that. And so like I don't want to spend money for the sake of spending money. And I just think in the world, like some of the more raw ideas that you come up with that aren't perfect and shiny, when perfect and shiny to me is it feels a little bit like a used car salesman. Okay. So there's lots of times that I tell like the production staff or the different things like that. Remember guys, there's a fine line between art and used car salesman, right? When hey, just because we can doesn't mean we should. We don't throw out lights all over the place and blow people's minds. It's just kind of like feels like flash and trash. Like I can just do these things, but there are certain times where a song has me feel broken and dark inside, and I don't know what to do. And the song is echoing what I feel. And yeah, you got me. And so the room is blue. And at a certain point in time, we talk about God's love, and we start to slowly warm the room. And people are like, visually, the song did for me the same thing that audibly it did, right? Like the crescendo will do in a song, and like that's art, and that's a beautiful art. And so I do think less is more in that end too. Don't feel like you have to blow minds. I worked at this one church. Their big tagline was, "We're not your grandma's church." And I was like, I need you to know that that's not helpful. Like don't lead with what we're not, lead with what God's calling you to be. Right. Like let's go get those people. Let's go do that. We're not trying to flip off all the churches that do something that you don't like. Okay. Because 1 Corinthians 12, there's a reason for that. There's people that are going to connect there. I don't know. Does that help? Does that work?
It was so helpful. Like I want people to hear that. Once again, it comes to story. You said, we're in the art business, not the used car selling business. And art is story. Art is, pictures tell stories, movies tell stories, books tell stories. And
why do you connect to a story? Because at some point in time, you connect it. You parallel your life or your mindset to one of the characters, and you go, I feel what you feel. I'm going where you're going, and therefore, when something happens to the character, you go, man, I feel like it happened to me. Now I'm all in, right? Well, that's what we do on the weekend.
Yep. Every time I'm around you, I learn something. And what I learned, this is such a rich conversation, but what you just said to me was, and this is what I'm taking away, what I learned from you was, and I wrote it down, regardless of the size of your organization, regardless of your budget, just tell the story well.
Yeah.
That's what I took from you. Like that's what I heard you saying.
Also think about it like this, the more you think, we will think that we need to tell more of it than the people need to hear. Simple wins. Okay. And so, which I'm not good at, by the way, which is why I tell really long stories. But simple wins when you're on stage. Okay, you need a point, you need some elements around it to kind of create some substance around it, but you don't have to tell every element of the story. You don't feel like you missed this or this. Just get them where they need to go. You know, simple wins.
Hey, what's one thing that's bringing joy to your journey right now?
This, I feel bad saying this because I know COVID is a world that is really, really hard, and you know, we've lost people we know, and I know, you know, people that I care a lot about. But COVID has actually really brought a lot to my journey. If I'm not careful, I won't stop. I'm the kind of the person who's like, hey, what if this? What if this? What if this? And in the last year, I haven't really traveled, you know, and that's means I've been around my family more. I've been around my kids more. I've been able to I've had to slow down more, you know, and my body, I didn't realize how badly my body needed it. So I will say that a different pace, and being a lot more present with my family it's bringing me tons of joy. It's also bringing me tons of clarity on things that I probably need to keep in my life that I didn't have in my life before. I for some reason, I'm the guy that feels like I always have at least 2 jobs, and that's not a bad thing. I probably still will, but I don't need 3, right? I don't need 4. I don't need 5, whatever it is, you know? I said I own Storylabs. My business partner does 90% of it right now because I'm doing a lot at Hope. And so it's okay. That's great. I love getting a chance to be a part of it, but I don't feel guilty about the fact that I can't be more a part of it right now. He's amazing and crushing it. And so I'm like, Josh, go kill it. I'm going to sit for a little bit, you know? So yeah, the pace is bringing me joy.
So it's so interesting you said that. You framed your answer like that, because I've had a conversation with, I've had this discussion with a number of people, and they all frame it the way you framed it. And I think you spoke to this, but I think we sometimes create a false dichotomy between joy and trials. And what you're describing is so scriptural. What you're describing is COVID sucks. Like COVID it's a trial.
Yep.
James says, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds,
right?
Because, paraphrase, good stuff happens.
Yep.
So what you're saying is, yeah, it's a trial. We all acknowledge that. We're not going to create a false dichotomy. We're going to just let it be comfortably together and say, yeah, it's a trial, but in this trial, I have found joy in my family. I have found joy in simplicity. I found joy in slowing down. And that's a huge takeaway, Don. Like that's a huge takeaway. And I like how you said it, because it once again affirms, yeah, like in the midst of a trial, we can find joy.
Yeah.
Because we have a different paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, man. Don, thank you so much for your time and just for who you are. And I'm glad to hear Exponential is going to be, it's still going on. If you go on, you can go to their website. I've been going to the website. They're doing group stuff. They're doing lots of virtual stuff.
Yeah, we did 100 roundtables on racial reconciliation. That was one of the more stretching and rewarding things to conferences to write. So I didn't. It was weird because I had to do it through a different medium, right? But working with the different presenters that we work through. If there's anything our world needs right now, the whole theme this last year was together, and this idea of the great collaboration and churches that were working together, and then all of the things that happened in the world of racial reconciliation this last year was like, we've got to do something. And to be honest with you, we were worried because there's a lot of churches that just don't want to talk about that. And we were like, well, you know, we're just going to go there anyway. And all of that's available to watch still and be a part of. We're going to do some regional conferences this fall on the Together theme still. And it's going to be really great. And I'm excited about that. And then next year in March, it's like the first week of March, we're going to do a conference all around the Holy Spirit, which it's going to be like, it's going to stretch me, you know, just the tradition that I grew up in. I'm asking for a lot of help from people, because I'm not saying that we didn't believe in the Holy Spirit, but there was areas that we just didn't go, right? And so we're gonna have to really be careful and strategic, but God's gonna do some stuff. I mean, what I've been telling people a lot is, you know, when you're a church planter or you're starting from the very beginning, you've never needed the Holy Spirit more, right? We're like, oh my goodness, I gotta have him. if you have any number of success in what you're doing and you've got money in the bank and things like that, it's pretty easy to go, I got this, and almost start to forget the Holy Spirit got you there in the first place, right? So in a weird way, this idea of empowered, I've been kind of subtly telling people it's like reintroducing you to the Holy Spirit, like, because for some of us, we forgot, you know, it's
well,
gonna
like in my tribe growing up, we had the same tribe actually.
Yeah.
We believed in the Holy Spirit, but we wanted him to show up late for worship, sit in the back row, do nothing conspicuous, and then leave early. It's like,
exactly right. Exactly right.
I love this, dude. That's gonna be an awesome theme.
Yeah, it's gonna be nuts.
Great. All right, man. Thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Hey, to everybody listening, I talk fast. I apologize. Put it on slow. You might understand some words that I say.
And if they want to connect with you, they can go to storylabs.info, right? To get
Storylabs.info. Yep. Don at storylabs.info is one. Don at exponential.org. Don S at hope.net. There's all kinds of ways. Have a blast.
Yeah, I encourage people, if they're needing work with creativity, with telling a better story through their building, through their environment. That was awesome, man. Through their environment, through moments, and through awareness, then hook up with Don. All right.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Bud.